The gray Minneapolis morning swallowed another 1,000 corporate dreams as I stepped into the conference room at 6:59 a.m. 7 minutes later, my career evaporated with a termination letter sliding across the polished mahogany table. The executives' practiced sympathy couldn't mask their relief. They thought they'd won. They didn't know that by 3 p.m., their entire board would be trembling before evidence they'd spent years burying. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planned. It's simply revealing the truth they've been desperately hiding. My name is Emma Caldwell, and until this morning, I was the marketing director at Northcrest Dynamics, one of Minneapolis's most prestigious tech conglomerates, 35 years old, single mother. And according to my last performance review, an invaluable asset to the company's strategic vision. Those words feel like ash in my mouth now. The Northcrest Tower pierces the Minneapolis skyline like a glass needle. 42 floors of ambition and broken promises. I've spent 7 years climbing its corporate ladder, each rung slicker with office politics than the last. Every morning, I'd arrive before sunrise, watching the city wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows while preparing campaigns that generated millions in revenue. Every evening, I'd leave long after my daughter Lily's bedtime, carrying home the guilt that working mothers know too well. The marketing department occupied the entire 31st floor, a carefully designed open workspace meant to foster collaboration and transparency. What it really fostered was paranoia and performance theater. Glass walls everywhere, ensuring everyone could see who stayed latest, who lunched with whom, who got called into closed-door meetings. Privacy was a luxury reserved for the C-suite. I'd learned to navigate this fishbowl existence with calculated precision. Smile at the right people. Speak up in meetings, but never overshadow the men who needed their egos stroked. Deliver results that couldn't be ignored, yet somehow remain non-threatening. It was exhausting. This constant calibration of competence and humility. The culture at Northcrest was what HR generously called competitive. What they meant was cutthroat. Colleagues would sabotage presentations, steal credit for ideas, and whisper poison into the right ears. I'd watched 3 talented women before me get pushed out through various creative means, performance improvement plans that appeared from nowhere, suddenly eliminated positions, vague accusations of cultural fit issues. Richard Hale, our senior vice president of operations, had perfected this art form. 48, with silver temples and a politician's smile, he treated the company like his personal chessboard. He'd joined Northcrest 2 years ago from a competitor, bringing with him a reputation for streamlining operations. Translation: he excelled at identifying threats to his advancement and neutralizing them. Richard and I had clashed from day one. Not openly, that would have been suicide. Our war was fought in budget meetings where my proposals mysteriously lost funding, in emails where my name got dropped from CC lists, in casual conversations where he'd question my bandwidth given my family obligations. He never said single mother like it was a slur, but I heard it anyway. What Richard didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything, every suspicious budget reallocation, every project that somehow shifted from marketing to operations. Every meeting where numbers didn't quite add up. At first, it was just professional paranoia, a habit formed from years of watching talented women get blindsided. But patterns emerged, breadcrumbs leading to something bigger than petty office politics. Last month, I'd stumbled onto discrepancies in the Morrison Industries acquisition, a $20 million deal Richard had spearheaded. The numbers in his presentations didn't match the actual contracts. Money was being moved, hidden, dispersed into shadow projects that existed only on paper. I'd spent weeks quietly gathering evidence, unsure what to do with it. Whistleblowing in corporate America was career suicide, even when you were right, especially when you were right. The bitter irony was that I'd been planning my exit strategy. Not like this, not in disgrace, but carefully, professionally. I'd been interviewing with startups, companies hungry for experienced leadership without the toxic politics, places where Lily might actually see me for dinner. But Richard must have sensed my retreat, smelled blood in the water. Predators always know when prey is planning to run. This morning's meeting invitation had arrived at 11 p.m. last night. Urgent, strategic discussion, 7 a.m. conference room A. The late notice was deliberate, designed to unsettle. I'd barely slept. Running through scenarios, preparing defenses for attacks I couldn't predict. Now, sitting in my car in the parking garage after my termination, I stared at the box of personal items they'd so efficiently packed for me. 7 years reduced to a banker's box. A framed photo of Lily. My lucky coffee mug. The small succulent that had somehow survived the fluorescent wasteland of corporate life. But they'd made one crucial mistake. In their haste to escort me out, they'd forgotten about the backup drive in my desk drawer, the one containing every piece of evidence I'd gathered on Richard's financial misconduct. They thought they'd silenced me. They had no idea what was coming. The conference room at 7 a.m. felt like a tribunal. Richard sat at the head of the table, flanked by Janet Morrison from HR and David Brennan, our CFO. Their faces wore matching expressions of professional gravitas, the kind rehearsed in mirrors before delivering terminal diagnoses. "Emma, thank you for coming on such short notice," Richard began, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "I'm afraid we need to discuss some concerns about your performance and fit within the organization." My stomach dropped, but I kept my face neutral. "What concerns?" Janet shuffled papers, avoiding eye contact. "There have been multiple complaints about your management style, team members feeling pressured, unrealistic deadlines, a hostile work environment." "That's absurd," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building. "I'd like to see these complaints. Who made them? When?" "The complaints were made anonymously through our ethics hotline," Richard interjected. "We take all such reports seriously." "Anonymous?" "Of course. Impossible to defend against ghosts." David cleared his throat. "Additionally, there are questions about budget overruns in your department. The Mitchell campaign exceeded projections by 30%. Because Richard redirected funds mid-project," I shot back. "I have the emails documenting—" "Emma." Richard's voice cut through mine, sharp as glass. "This isn't a negotiation. The decision has been made. We're offering you a severance package, 2 months' pay, continued health benefits through the quarter. In exchange, you'll sign a standard non-disclosure agreement and agree to a mutual non-disparagement clause." The room tilted. 7 years of 60-hour weeks, of missing Lily's school plays, of building campaigns that transformed Northcrest's market position, reduced to a 2-month buyout and a gag order. "This is wrongful termination," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "You're manufacturing causes because—" "Because what?" Richard leaned forward, his mask slipping for just a moment. I saw the predator underneath, confident in his kill. "Be very careful about making accusations you can't prove, Emma. It would be unfortunate if this situation became messier. You have a daughter to think about, future employment to consider." The threat hung between us, unsubtle as a loaded gun. Janet pushed a folder across the table. "The termination is effective immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to collect personal items. Your access badges and company devices need to be surrendered now." My hands trembled as I removed my badge, the plastic still warm from my pocket. The company iPhone followed, its screen going dark as if sensing its abandonment. Each item I placed on the table felt like another piece of my identity being stripped away. "I need time to review the severance agreement," I managed. "You have 48 hours, Janet said, her voice professionally sympathetic. "After that, the offer expires and termination proceeds without severance." Richard stood, signaling the execution was complete. "Tom from security is waiting outside. He'll accompany you to your desk. You have 15 minutes to gather personal items." The walk to my office was a parade of humiliation. Tom, a security guard I chatted with every morning for years, couldn't meet my eyes. Conversations died as we passed. Heads turned toward computer screens with sudden, intense focus. The news had already spread. The digital wildfire of corporate gossip. At my desk, colleagues pretended to be absorbed in work while secretly watching. Tom stood uncomfortably close, as if I might steal company secrets with my family photos. I packed mechanically. The picture of Lily at last year's science fair. My coffee mug from the Seattle conference. The stress ball shaped like a brain that had absorbed 7 years of frustration. "You can't take any files or documents," Tom said apologetically as I reached for my notebook. "It's personal notes," I protested. "Sorry, Emma. Orders." My computer screen was already locked, displaying the IT message. "Access revoked. Please contact administrator." 7 years of work, projects, achievements, all behind a digital wall I'd never cross again. Sarah from my team appeared at my cubicle entrance, tears in her eyes. "Emma, I'm so sorry. This is such bullshit." "Ms. Martinez, please return to your desk." Tom interrupted. Sarah squeezed my hand quickly before retreating. Others watched from safe distances, their expressions mixing sympathy with relief. There, but for the grace of God, go I. The elevator ride down felt eternal. Each floor we passed represented another year of my life invested in this place. 31, 30, 29. By the time we reached the lobby, I felt hollowed out, weightless. Tom walked me to the parking garage entrance. "I'm really sorry, Emma," he said quietly, finally meeting my eyes. "For what it's worth, everyone knows this is wrong." But knowing and doing something about it were different things. That was the North Crest way. Everyone knew the injustices, the politics, the casual cruelties. They just learned to look away, to survive. In my car, surrounded by the concrete pillars of the parking garage, I finally let myself feel it. The rage came first, hot and blinding, then humiliation, then fear. Lily's tuition, the mortgage, health insurance. But underneath all of it, something else stirred: determination. They thought they'd won. Richard sitting in that conference room, probably already planning how to redistribute my responsibilities among his allies. But he'd made one crucial error in his calculated execution. He'd underestimated me. The 15-minute drive home felt like crossing into another dimension. The morning rush hour traffic moved around me while I sat frozen at red lights. My North Crest parking pass still hanging from the rearview mirror, now just a worthless piece of plastic. My phone, my personal one they couldn't take, erupted with messages the moment word spread. Former colleagues expressing shock. LinkedIn connections suddenly reaching out. The digital sympathy parade of the newly terminated. I turned it off. Their concern, however genuine, felt like salt in fresh wounds. The house was eerily quiet at 8:30 a.m. Lily was at school. Wouldn't know until tonight that her mother had joined the ranks of the unemployed. How do you explain corporate backstabbing to a 10-year-old who still believes in fairness? I sat at my kitchen table, the severance folder spread before me like tarot cards predicting a grim future. 2 months' pay. In Minneapolis's job market, that was nothing. The non-disclosure agreement was comprehensive, vengeful in its thoroughness. I couldn't discuss my termination. Couldn't speak negatively about North Crest or any of its executives. Couldn't even acknowledge that I'd signed an NDA, legal suffocation. My laptop pinged, an email notification. My North Crest account was already dead. But my personal email remained. The sender made my breath catch. Sarah Martinez, using her personal Gmail. Check your cloud storage, the one from the Seattle conference. ES. Sarah knew. She'd been there when I'd set up the personal cloud backup, paranoid even then about losing work to IT failures or political maneuvering. We'd joked about corporate paranoia over drinks. Not so funny now. I logged in with trembling fingers. There it was. Everything I'd accumulated on Richard's financial irregularities. Spreadsheets showing budget diversions. Email screenshots documenting his project manipulations. Most damning, the Morrison Industries acquisition files with their labyrinth of financial discrepancies. $20 million. That's what Richard had been playing with. Moving funds through shell projects, padding invoices, creating phantom consultancies. I'd originally thought it was just aggressive accounting, the kind of ethical flexibility that powered corporate America. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became. This was fraud. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Emma. It's Marcus Washington. Marcus, former Northcrest CFO, pushed out 6 months ago in a restructuring that everyone knew was Richard's handiwork. I heard what happened, he continued. Richard's special brand of problem-solving, I assume. I can't discuss. You haven't signed anything yet, Marcus interrupted. Until you do, you're free to talk, and we should talk. O'Malley's, noon. Back booth. The line went dead. O'Malley's was a dive bar in downtown Minneapolis, the kind of place where corporate types went to disappear. Marcus was already there, nursing a coffee that looked as bitter as his expression. They got you too, he said without preamble. Allegedly performance issues, I replied, sliding into the cracked vinyl booth. Marcus laughed, harsh and knowing. Same playbook he used on me. Anonymous complaints, budget concerns, vague insinuations. He's cleaning house. Emma. Anyone who might notice what he's doing with the money. You know about the Morrison acquisition? His eyes sharpened. I suspected, couldn't prove it before they locked me out. But you found something, didn't you? That's why you're here instead of signing their hush money agreement. I hesitated. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. But Marcus had been where I was now, discarded by the same machine. 20 million in redirected funds, I said quietly. Hidden through project overruns and consultant fees. Marcus whistled low. Jesus, that's bigger than I thought. He pulled out a business card. Jonathan Blackwood, securities attorney. He specializes in whistleblower cases, SEC violations. The kind of lawyer who makes corporate boards lose sleep. I can't afford, he works on contingency for cases like this. If what you have is solid, Northcrest will be begging to settle. The SEC doesn't play games with financial fraud. I took the card, its weight feeling heavier than paper should. Emma. Marcus leaned forward. Richard thinks he's untouchable. 3 executives pushed out in 2 years, all of us silenced by NDAs in fear. But he got greedy and arrogant. That's always their downfall. By the time I left O'Malley's, the humiliation of the morning had crystallized into something harder, sharper. They'd taken my job, threatened my future, tried to bury me in legal threats and financial fear. But they'd failed to take the one thing that mattered, the truth. At home, I opened my laptop again. The evidence was all there, waiting. Financial reports, email chains, a digital paper trail of corporate malfeasance that Richard thought he'd hidden. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Heard about this morning. Shameful. The board should know how their executives really operate. A friend. I didn't recognize the number, but the board stuck in my mind. Northcrest's board of directors met quarterly, rubber stamping Richard's proposals, trusting his numbers. What if they knew those numbers were fiction? The severance agreement still lay on my kitchen table. 48 hours ticking down. Sign it, take the money, stay quiet, move on. The safe choice. The expected choice. I picked up Jonathan Blackwood's card instead. They thought they'd fired Emma Caldwell, single mother, compliant corporate soldier. They were about to meet Emma Caldwell, whistleblower. The morning's humiliation still burned, but it was fuel now. Richard Hale had orchestrated my professional execution at 7 a.m. By 3 p.m., I'd return the favor. Jonathan Blackwood's office occupied the 20th floor of the IDS tower. All dark wood and leather-bound books, the kind of space designed to intimidate corporate executives. But when he reviewed my evidence, his expression shifted from professional interest to predatory excitement. This is extensive, he said, scrolling through the files on my laptop. How long have you been documenting this? 6 months, actively. But some of these irregularities go back 2 years. And you're certain about the Morrison acquisition numbers. I pulled up the spreadsheet I'd painstakingly assembled. The public filing shows 20 million for the acquisition, but internal documents show only 14 million actually went to Morrison Industries. The other $6 million. I traced the money through various transfers. Shell companies, consultant fees to firms that barely exist. Project overruns that never produced deliverables. Jonathan leaned back, fingers steepled. This isn't just fraud, it's embezzlement. The SEC will be very interested. But Emma, once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. Northcrest will come at you with everything they have. They already have, I said. What else can they take? Your reputation, your future employment prospects. They'll paint you as a disgruntled employee, possibly mentally unstable. I've seen it before. I thought of Lily, of the mortgage, of the careful life I'd built. Then I thought of Richard's smug face this morning, so certain he'd won. When can we file? That's the thing. Jonathan smiled, the expression sharp. We don't need to file with the SEC first. There's a faster way to get their attention. He explained his strategy. The Northcrest Board of Directors was meeting this afternoon, a routine quarterly review. Richard would be presenting the Q3 numbers, including the Morrison acquisition's success. The board members' contact information was publicly available through SEC filings. If we send the evidence directly to the board members during their meeting, Jonathan continued, they'll be legally obligated to investigate. They can't claim ignorance once they've been formally notified of potential fraud, and if they try to cover it up after receiving evidence, they become liable. I finished. Exactly. Personal, criminal liability. Board members protect many things, but never their own necks. We spent the next 2 hours preparing the package. Jonathan crafted the legal framework while I organized the evidence into a devastating narrative. Revenue reports showing the missing millions. Email chains where Richard discussed alternative accounting methods. The phantom consultant invoices. Bank records showing transfers to offshore accounts. The coup de grace was a recorded phone conversation I'd saved from 3 weeks ago. Richard, thinking he was on a secure line, explicitly discussing how to hide the Morrison fund diversions from the annual audit. Minnesota was a one-party consent state. The recording was legal. This is a nuclear bomb, Jonathan said after listening to it. At 2:30 p.m., we were ready. The board meeting had started at 2:00. Richard would be in full presentation mode, selling his victories, taking credit for the company's growth. The perfect moment. I'll send it from my firm's email, Jonathan said. Gives it legal weight. But Emma, once this sends, you need to be prepared. Your phone will explode. Media might get involved. This is $20 million in fraud. It's not going to stay quiet. I thought about the 2-month severance, the safe path of silence. Then I remembered every woman Richard had forced out before me. Every employee who'd been sacrificed for his ambition. Every investor deceived by his fraudulent numbers. Send it. Jonathan hit enter at exactly 2:47 p.m. The email went to all 12 board members' direct addresses, marked urgent, evidence of financial fraud, immediate action required. The subject line alone would stop conversations. The attached files would end careers. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. At 3:03 p.m., my phone rang. A 612 number I didn't recognize. Ms. Caldwell, this is Margaret Sullivan, chairwoman of Northcrest's board of directors. My heart hammered. Yes? We've just received some extremely concerning documentation. Are you able to verify the authenticity of these materials? Every document is genuine. Ms. Sullivan, I have originals and digital trails for all of it. A long pause. In the background, I could hear raised voices, the chaos of a boardroom in crisis. Ms. Caldwell, we're suspending the meeting immediately. Our legal counsel is reviewing your submission. I need you to understand, if this is accurate, there will be immediate consequences. I understand. Don't sign any agreements with Northcrest. Don't accept any severance. Your termination this morning is under review. Can your attorney provide contact information? I gave her Jonathan's details. When she hung up, my hands were shaking. Now we wait, Jonathan said, but we didn't wait long. At 3:27 p.m., an email blast went out to all Northcrest employees from the board. All financial transactions are frozen pending emergency audit. Richard Hale has been placed on administrative leave effective immediately. At 3:41 p.m., local news picked up the story. Breaking, Northcrest Dynamics Board investigating potential financial fraud. At 3:56 p.m., Richard called my personal phone. I didn't answer. He called 6 more times. By 4:15 p.m., forensic accountants were reportedly entering the Northcrest building. By 4:30, security was escorting Richard out. The same walk of shame I'd endured 9 hours earlier. But unlike my quiet humiliation, news cameras caught his exit. The anonymous text from this morning made sense now. Someone on the board had suspected something was wrong. They'd been waiting for someone brave or angry enough to light the match. I sat in Jonathan's office, watching the news coverage on his wall-mounted TV. The morning felt like a lifetime ago. 7 hours from termination to vindication. From victim to whistleblower. From silence to heard. They'll try to negotiate now, Jonathan warned. Offer you reinstatement, a promotion, whatever it takes to contain this. But I was done with Northcrest. Done with corporate games and glass ceilings and men like Richard who destroyed careers for sport. The evidence would speak for itself now. The SEC would investigate. The board would clean house. And Richard Hale, he'd learn what it felt like to have your life dismantled in a single morning. The next 48 hours were orchestrated chaos, but I moved through them with surgical precision. Jonathan's conference room became our war room. Documents spread across the mahogany table like battle plans. We weren't just building a case anymore. We were constructing Richard's professional coffin. The SEC wants to meet tomorrow, Jonathan announced Tuesday morning, hanging up his phone. They're fast-tracking this. 20 million in fraud gets their attention. I'd spent the night organizing evidence into categories: the Morrison acquisition discrepancies, the shell companies, the phantom consultants. But more kept surfacing. Sarah Martinez, emboldened by Richard's suspension, had quietly forwarded me additional documents. Invoices Richard had approved for services never rendered. Contracts with his signature authorizing payments to non-existent vendors. He wasn't just stealing, I told Jonathan, showing him the latest findings. He was building an entire shadow financial system within Northcrest. The media attention intensified hourly. My phone became unusable from the reporter calls. Jonathan fielded them all with practiced ease. Ms. Caldwell is cooperating fully with authorities. No further comment at this time. But I had my own plans brewing. Tuesday afternoon, Margaret Sullivan called again. Emma, I need to be frank. The initial forensic review has confirmed your allegations. We're looking at systematic fraud dating back 18 months. I'm not surprised. The board wants to meet with you, privately. We need to understand how this happened under our watch. I agreed, but on my terms. The meeting would be recorded. Jonathan would be present. And it would happen before any discussions of my future with Northcrest. That evening, I sat with Lily at our kitchen table, helping with homework while my phone silently lit up with messages. She'd noticed the tension, the way kids always do. Mom, are you okay? You seem different. I'm changing some things at work, sweetheart, making sure people do the right thing. Like when you made me tell Mrs. Peterson about breaking her garden gnome? Exactly like that, but with bigger gnomes. Wednesday arrived with a Wall Street Journal headline: Northcrest Dynamics fraud scandal deepens. The stock had dropped 12%. Richard had hired criminal defense attorneys. The FBI had joined the SEC investigation. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., almost exactly 48 hours after I detonated my evidence bomb. The symmetry felt appropriate. But I had one more card to play. That morning, I'd received a call from Daniel Kim, a former Northcrest controller who left abruptly last year. Emma, I heard about what you did. I have something you need to see. We met at a coffee shop in Uptown. Daniel looked nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder. When I found discrepancies in the books last year, I started documenting everything, he said, sliding me a flash drive. But Richard found out. He didn't fire me. He threatened me. Said he'd destroy my career, make sure I never worked in finance again. I have a family, Emma. I couldn't risk it. What's on the drive? Proof that Richard wasn't working alone. There are emails with 2 other executives, people still at Northcrest. They knew about the fraud. They profited from it. I stared at the drive. This wasn't just about Richard anymore. Why now? I asked. Because you did what I couldn't. You stood up to him. And if you're brave enough to take him down, maybe it's time I found my courage too. I pocketed the drive. The board meeting had just become much more interesting. At 1:45 p.m., Jonathan and I arrived at Northcrest. The building felt different, charged with barely contained panic. Employees whispered in corners. Security guards stood at every entrance. The empire was crumbling. The boardroom hadn't changed since Monday morning when I'd been terminated. Same mahogany table, same leather chairs, but the faces around it looked aged by years, not days. Margaret Sullivan, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, gestured for us to sit. Emma, before we begin, I want to personally apologize for Monday's actions. The termination was orchestrated without board knowledge or approval. With respect, Ms. Sullivan. The board's ignorance enabled this. Where was the oversight? She flinched but nodded. Fair point, that's why we're here. For the next hour, I walked them through everything, not just the fraud, but the culture that enabled it, the systematic removal of anyone who asked questions, the fear that kept employees silent, the old boys network that protected predators like Richard. This isn't just about missing money, I said. It's about a toxic system that rewards corruption and punishes integrity. Board member Thomas Wright interrupted. Ms. Caldwell, what would it take for you to return to Northcrest? To help us clean this up? I'd expected the offer. Nothing. Northcrest and I are done. Name your price. Senior VP position. C-suite role. You're not listening, I said, pulling out Daniel's flash drive. This contains evidence that Richard wasn't alone. The corruption goes deeper. And you want me to come back and pretend it's all fixed because one man got caught? The room went silent. What's on that drive? Margaret asked quietly. The truth you don't want to hear. Richard had accomplices. People who are probably in this building right now, shredding documents and deleting emails. I slid the drive across the table. I'm giving this to the FBI this afternoon. I wanted you to know first. The investigation is going to expand. More executives will fall. The stock will tank further. Northcrest might not survive this. Margaret picked up the drive like it might explode. Why warn us? Because despite everything, thousands of innocent employees depend on this company. They deserve better leadership. Real change, not cosmetic fixes. I stood to leave, Jonathan beside me. Emma, Margaret called out, what will you do now? What I should have done years ago. Build something better. Without the poison. Without the politics. Without men like Richard Hale. As we walked out, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking. Northcrest executives under FBI investigation for embezzlement. The afternoon sun hit my face as we exited the building. The same sun that had witnessed my humiliation Monday morning now watched my vindication. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about revelation. The truth, laid bare for everyone to see. Richard thought he'd destroyed me at 7 a.m. Monday. By Wednesday afternoon, I'd destroyed the entire corrupt system he'd built. And I was just getting started. Thursday morning arrived with catastrophic precision. At exactly 3 p.m., the same hour I'd sent the evidence to the board 3 days earlier, the FBI raided Northcrest's headquarters. I watched from a coffee shop across the street, my laptop open to news feeds that updated by the minute. Federal agents execute search warrant at Northcrest Dynamics. Trading, suspended as fraud investigation expands. 3 more executives named in embezzlement scheme. Jonathan sat beside me, fielding calls from reporters, prosecutors, and Northcrest's increasingly desperate legal team. They want to meet, he said, covering his phone. Richard's lawyers, they're offering a deal. No deals. He burns. The plan I'd crafted wasn't about negotiation. It was about complete destruction of the system that had protected him. Every document I'd submitted had been selected to create a cascade effect. The Morrison acquisition led to the shell companies. The shell companies led to the offshore accounts. The offshore accounts led to tax evasion. Each thread, when pulled, unraveled another crime. My phone buzzed. Sarah Martinez. They're taking computers from the executive floor. Richard's office is being stripped. It's chaos here. Another text, this one from Marcus Washington. Check Channel 5, now. I pulled up the local news stream. Richard Hale was being escorted from his Adena mansion in handcuffs. His wife stood in the doorway, her perfect suburban facade cracking as cameras captured her husband's downfall. The silver-haired executive who'd smiled while firing me Monday morning now ducked his head to avoid the photographers. Emma, Jonathan said carefully, you should prepare yourself. When he's formally charged, your name will come out as the whistleblower. The protection only goes so far. Let them know it was me. Let every corrupt executive know that the people they step on might be taking notes. At 3:47 p.m., the Department of Justice held a press conference. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Patricia Hayes, outlined the charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, $20 million stolen over 18 months. 3 executives arrested, more arrests pending. This investigation was initiated by a brave whistleblower who provided extensive documentation of systematic fraud. Hayes announced, without their courage, this theft might have continued indefinitely. My phone exploded. Former colleagues, journalists, even executives from competing companies. The story was everywhere. David versus Goliath. The single mother who brought down a corporate titan. But the real satisfaction came from an unexpected source. At 4:15 p.m., an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. The message was simple. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. Former employee, 2017. I knew that ID format. It was from someone Richard had forced out in 2017. Then another email came, and another. By evening, I'd received dozens. All from people Richard had destroyed over the years, thanking me for giving them closure. Margaret Sullivan called at 5 p.m. The board has accepted our responsibility for this failure. 4 members are resigning, including myself. But Emma, I need you to know. The forensic audit has uncovered something else. What? Your marketing campaigns over the last 3 years generated $40 million in revenue. Richard had been taking credit for those numbers in his reports. The board wants to ensure you're properly compensated for your contributions, beyond any whistleblower rewards. I almost laughed. They were trying to buy absolution. Donate it, I said. Create a fund for employees who've been wrongfully terminated. Call it the Corporate Accountability Fund. Silence. Then, that's incredibly generous. It's not generous. It's justice. That evening, I sat with Lily for dinner. The TV off, phones silenced. She knew something major had happened. Kids at school had mentioned seeing her mom's name online. Did you win, Mom? I told the truth. Sweetheart, sometimes that's the biggest victory. But Mr. Hale was mean to you, right? And now he's in trouble? He's facing consequences for his choices. That's how it should work. She considered this, twirling spaghetti on her fork. Good. Nobody should be mean to my mom. Later, after Lily was asleep, I stood on my small balcony, looking out at the Minneapolis skyline. The North Crest Tower still dominated the view. But it looked different now. Less imposing, more fragile. My phone rang. Jonathan. Emma, Richard's been denied bail. He's considered a flight risk. The prosecutors say he tried to transfer money to the Caymans this afternoon. Of course he did. There's more. The SEC is offering you the full whistleblower reward, 20% of what they recover. We're looking at potentially $4 million. $4 million. From administrative assistant to millionaire, all because I'd kept receipts on a criminal. Oh, and Emma? 60 Minutes wants an interview. Netflix is asking about documentary rights. You're about to become very famous. I thought about fame, about money, about vindication, but what I felt most was relief. The weight I'd carried for months, the knowledge of his crimes, the fear of retaliation, the burden of truth, was finally lifted. Tell them all to wait, I said. The story isn't over yet. Because Daniel's flash drive had revealed 2 more names, 2 executives still walking free, still believing they'd escaped the net. Tomorrow, their time would come. Richard Hale had fired me at 7 a.m. Monday, confident in his power. By 3 p.m. Thursday, he was in federal custody, his empire in ruins, his freedom gone. But I wasn't thinking about Richard anymore. I was thinking about every employee still trapped in toxic systems, afraid to speak up. My story would be their proof that truth, properly documented and strategically deployed, could bring down giants. The Minneapolis night was cold, but I felt nothing but warmth. Tomorrow, I'd continue the fight. Tonight, I'd savor the absoluteness of Richard's destruction. Justice, served at exactly the right temperature. Friday morning's news cycle belonged entirely to Northcrest's collapse. The stock had lost 40% of its value. Trading remained suspended. CNBC ran a segment titled The 7-Hour Revenge: How One Woman Destroyed a Corporate Empire. I watched from my kitchen, coffee growing cold, as financial analysts dissected Richard's fraud with clinical precision. They showed his mugshot repeatedly, the polished executive reduced to a criminal identification number. The investigation has expanded to include Chief Operations Officer Michael Brennan and Senior VP Janet Morrison. The anchor announced. Both were named in documents provided by the whistleblower. Janet Morrison, the HR executive who'd sat beside Richard Monday morning, avoiding eye contact while reading my fabricated performance issues. She'd known. She'd always known. My phone rang. Margaret Sullivan. Emma, the board met in emergency session last night. We're facing complete organizational collapse. Clients are fleeing. Employees are resigning en masse. We need stability. That's no longer my problem. Actually, it might be. The FBI wants to appoint an external oversight committee during the investigation. They've asked for your input on who should lead it. The irony was delicious. They wanted me to help choose who would autopsy the company that had tried to bury me. Marcus Washington, I said without hesitation. He knows where the bodies are buried and has the integrity you all lacked. At noon, Richard's attorney held a press conference. Richard himself wasn't present. Federal custody didn't allow for media appearances. The lawyer, sweating despite the cool weather, attempted damage control. Mr. Hale maintains his innocence. These allegations are the vindictive actions of a disgruntled former employee who was terminated for legitimate performance issues. Jonathan laughed beside me. He's really going with that defense? After the FBI found 2 sets of books? The prosecutor's response came within an hour. Patricia Hayes stood before cameras holding a stack of documents. Mr. Hale systematically stole $20 million. We have receipts, transfers, recordings. His guilt isn't in question. The only question is how many years he'll serve. She paused, then delivered the killing blow. We've also frozen personal assets totaling $15 million, including properties purchased with embezzled funds. Richard's house in Edina, his cabin in Aspen, the yacht moored in Miami. All bought with stolen money, all now property of federal asset forfeiture. Sarah Martinez texted, "They're interviewing everyone who worked under Richard, FBI agents in every conference room. People are crying." Then another text, "Thank you for being brave enough to do this." By 2 p.m., the other dominoes fell. Michael Brennan was arrested at Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport, attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica. Janet Morrison was taken into custody at her home, her teenage children watching their mother handcuffed in the driveway. Local news played the arrests on loop. 3 executives who'd ruled through fear, now experiencing fear themselves. At 2:45 p.m., something unexpected happened. A group of current Northcrest employees held an impromptu gathering outside the building. Someone had made signs. "Thank you, Emma," and truth wins. Videos spread across social media. The employees I thought were too scared to act, finally finding their voices. One woman spoke to reporters. Emma Caldwell saved this company from criminals. She did what none of us had the courage to do. Jonathan showed me his phone. You're trending on Twitter. Corporate justice? Emma was right. But the climax came at exactly 3 p.m. The FBI released Richard's recorded phone conversation, the one where he'd explicitly discussed hiding the embezzlement. Every major network played it simultaneously. Richard's voice, arrogant and clear, explaining how to move millions without detection. The board's idiots will never notice. They see what I show them. Emma's getting close, though. She's been asking questions. Emma won't be a problem much longer. I'm handling her Monday. The recording ended with Richard's laugh. Cruel, confident, wrong. The news anchors sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then, this appears to be a reference to Emma Caldwell's termination, planned days in advance. My wrongful termination case had just become evidence of conspiracy. Patricia Hayes called personally. Ms. Caldwell, that recording is the nail in his coffin. He's looking at 20 years minimum. The others are already negotiating plea deals. Will they testify against him? Janet Morrison flipped an hour ago. She's providing everything: emails, recordings, financial records. Richard is finished. I stood at my window, watching the sun set over Minneapolis. The same sun that had risen on my humiliation Monday morning. The same sun that had witnessed my carefully orchestrated destruction of Richard Hale and his corrupt network. My phone showed 247 unread messages. Job offers, interview requests, messages of support, but I ignored them all. Instead, I opened my laptop and began typing. An open letter to corporate America. This week, I exposed systematic fraud at Northcrest Dynamics. But this isn't just about one company or one corrupt executive. It's about a culture that protects predators and punishes truth-tellers. Every Richard Hale believes he's untouchable. Every toxic workplace thinks its secrets are safe. They're wrong. Document everything. Save every email. Record what you legally can. And when the moment comes, when they finally push too far, burn it all down. Your silence protects them. Your truth destroys them. Choose wisely. Emma Caldwell. I posted it on LinkedIn at exactly 3:30 p.m. Within an hour, it had 10,000 shares. Richard Hale thought he'd ended my career at 7 a.m. Monday. By 3 p.m. Friday, his career, freedom, and fortune were gone. Forever. The price of underestimating Emma Caldwell. 6 months later, I stood in front of floor-to-ceiling windows in my new office, not in a corporate tower, but in a converted warehouse in northeast Minneapolis. The space breathed creativity and transparency. Literal glass walls between workspaces. Natural light flooding every corner. Caldwell Consulting Group read the simple placard by the door. We specialized in corporate compliance and whistleblower protection. In 6 months, we'd grown to 12 employees, all refugees from toxic corporate cultures, all committed to accountability. The news played quietly on the wall-mounted screen. Richard Hale, in an orange jumpsuit, being sentenced. The judge's words were clear and final. 25 years in federal prison. Restitution of $20 million. A lifetime ban from serving as an officer in any public company. The camera caught Richard's face as the sentence was read. Gone was the silver-templed executive with the politician's smile. His hair had grayed completely. His shoulders slumped. He looked smaller, defeated, ordinary. Just another criminal facing consequences. Janet Morrison had received 8 years. Michael Brennan, 12. Their plea deals hadn't saved them from prison, only shortened their sentences. The entire executive leadership of Northcrest had been gutted, replaced by Marcus Washington and a team of reformers. Sarah Martinez, now my director of operations, knocked on my door. The Netflix crew is here for the final interview. The documentary, 7 Hours to Justice, had premiered last month. It chronicled not just my story, but the stories of dozens of employees Richard had destroyed over the years. Each one had reached out after his arrest, sharing their experiences, finding closure in his downfall. The interviewer settled across from me, cameras rolling. "Emma, it's been 6 months since that Monday morning. Richard Hale is going to prison. You've won. How does it feel?" I looked out the window at Minneapolis spreading beneath us. The North Crest Tower was visible in the distance, bearing a new company name now. The acquisition had gone through last month at a fraction of its former value. "It doesn't feel like winning," I said honestly. Thousands of innocent employees lost their jobs. Investors lost millions. Families were destroyed. Richard Hale created casualties far beyond what any prison sentence can repair. "Do you forgive him?" "Forgiveness implies he sought redemption. Last I heard, he's still claiming innocence, still blaming me for his downfall. So no, I don't forgive him. But I don't think about him either. He's irrelevant now." "What do you think about?" "The future, every day. We get calls from employees trapped in toxic situations, afraid to speak up. We help them document, protect themselves, find legal resources. We've assisted in exposing fraud at 3 other corporations already." The interviewer leaned forward. "Any regrets?" I thought about the question. The safe corporate job was gone. The steady ladder to climb vanished. But in its place, I'd built something meaningful. My only regret is not doing it sooner. I spent years accepting the unacceptable, thinking it was just how business worked. Richard firing me was the best thing that ever happened, not because it led to his downfall, but because it freed me from a system I should have left long ago. After the crew left, I walked through our office. Young professionals worked at standing desks, collaborating openly. No closed doors, no whispered conspiracies, no fear. The anti-North Crest. Lily arrived after school, settling in the break room to do homework. At 10, she understood more than I'd wanted her to about corporate corruption and standing up to bullies. But she also understood courage, integrity, and the power of truth. "Mom," she said, looking up from her math, "are you happy now?" It was such a simple question with such a complex answer. Happy that justice had been served. Yes. Happy that Richard would spend decades in prison. That felt more like grim satisfaction. Happy with where life had led? Absolutely. "I'm free, sweetheart. That's better than happy." As the sun set, that same Minneapolis sun that had witnessed every moment of this journey, I returned to my desk. An email waited from a Fortune 500 employee documenting harassment and fraud at the highest levels. Another story of corruption. Another Richard Hale believing he was untouchable. I opened a new case file and began typing my response. "Thank you for reaching out. Your courage in speaking up is the first step toward justice. Let's discuss how to document everything properly." The cycle continued. But now, the predators knew. Someone was watching. Someone was keeping records. Someone was willing to burn it all down for the truth. Richard Hale had created his own destroyer. In his arrogance, he'd fired the wrong woman at the wrong time with the wrong secrets in her possession. 7 hours from termination to devastation. A corporate execution that became a public execution. I looked at his mugshot, now framed on my wall, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that power is temporary, that actions have consequences, that sometimes the person you destroy on Monday morning can destroy your entire world by Monday afternoon. The office lights dimmed automatically as evening fell. Another day of building something better from the ashes of something rotten. Another day of proving that truth, properly wielded, is the most powerful weapon in corporate America. Richard Hale thought he'd fired Emma Caldwell, single mother, expendable employee. Instead, he'd created Emma Caldwell, corporate watchdog, nightmare of corrupt executives everywhere. His 25-year prison sentence began today. My real life had just begun. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate justice and revenge. I hope Emma's journey reminded you that no one is truly powerless when armed with truth and determination. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel for more tales of justice and karma. Share your thoughts about what you would have done in Emma's situation. Until next time, remember, document everything, fear nothing, and never let them silence your truth.